So it's great to be here. I'm excited to be here. And I want to take you on a journey. I want to give you the equivalent of a double espresso to wake up your mind and eat problems for breakfast. The question I want to answer today is, how do you lead disruption? And it seems like everybody is talking about disruption. But I want to say to you that the age of disruption is the age of history. From fire to money, to gunpowder, to printing, to steam engines, disruption has always been with us. The difference now is that it's gone exponential. That's what I mean by that is the speed and scale of change has gone from 1, 2, 3, 4 to 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, and so on. If I take 30 linear steps, it's going to be about 30 meters. If I take 30 exponential steps, it reaches 1 billion, which is 26 times around the planet. It took the telephone 75 years to reach 100 million users. It took WhatsApp 7 years to reach 1 billion, and they did it with 55 employees. What makes it even more interesting, though, is they sold for $19.8 billion. Vodafone has a 45-year history, 125,000 employees, but only 450 million users. This is the age of disruption. It's no longer about big or small. It's about fast or slow. So I want to start with a story. About 6 weeks ago, I wanted to interview an entrepreneur in New York. He's actually Danish. His name is Dennis Mortensen. And I got an email from his executive assistant. Her name is Amy Ingram. It was very polite, very professional, and she organized a meeting. A couple of weeks later, I met Dennis. He smiled at me. He said, "I've got a confession. What did you think of Amy Ingram?" I thought it was a strange question. I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, was she professional? How did she come across on the emails?" I said, "Yeah, great. Really professional, really to the point. Why are you asking? It's quite a strange question to ask me." He paused, he smiled, and he said, I'm sorry, I've got to confess, she's not human. She's AI. And the clue is in her name, Amy Ingram, AI. My first reaction was embarrassment. I was thinking about asking her out for a drink. My second reaction was, wow, I need to use Amy Ingram. And this is a great example of the new reality that we're living in. Like most great ideas, you have to fall in love with a problem. Having an idea is like having a baby. So today, a key message is you need to think about pain points and problems. And for Dennis, and I'm sure many of you can relate to this, his pain problem was meetings. Attending meetings, rescheduling meetings. He actually did the maths, and in 1 year, he'd scheduled or rescheduled over 1,000 meetings. Now, 8 hours is only 480 minutes. If you're lucky, you live for 960 months. That's 80 years of age, or 29,200 days. My goal is not to depress you here, but what it means is urgency. And so for Dennis, he thought, well, I'm spending so much of my valuable time on scheduling and rescheduling meetings that this is a problem which I want to correct. And his company, X.AI, has just received $10 million of investment from Silicon Valley VCs. And you're going to see a lot more of this over the next 10 years. It's likely that you'll have AI in your team, and 30, 40 years' time, you might be reporting to AI, which is pretty scary. We have a big problem today. Our planet is under attack. The immune system is under attack. And the numbers tell the story. Record levels of climate change, record levels of carbon dioxide emissions. In the last 40 years, 60% of our wildlife has disappeared. Population, 100 years ago, we had a population, global population of around 1 billion. Today, it's 7.5 billion, and it's predicted to go to 10.5 billion within 360 months, or 30 years of time. There's over 5 trillion pieces of plastic in our water systems. And we're experiencing record extreme weather events. Hurricane Irma, Maria, Harvey. This is the river Shintaru in Indonesia. When I saw it, I felt physically sick. At the basin of the river are 5 million people that use it every day for drinking, for swimming. It's acidic. This is happening right now. And so the goal today is, how do we lead disruption? And what do I mean by that? I mean finding new solutions to old problems and new solutions to new problems. It's about faster, smarter, better, more agile. It's about thinking big, thinking 10x, not 10%. And it's about courage, sisu, the Viking spirit, that action-oriented mindset. So, to frame the talk, there are 3 big questions I want to answer today. Number 1, how do you change before a crisis forces you to change? 2, how do you break out of old patterns of thinking? And 3, are you ready to lead disruption? And that means disrupting yourself, your head, your heart, and disrupting your business. And that's not easy to do, so I want to give you some shortcuts. Let's start by looking at 8 big exponential technologies that are going to affect the way that you live and work for the rest of your life. One big one to start off is the Internet of Things. According to Cisco, we're going to go from 5 billion to 20 billion machine-to-machine connections by 2020. It's a 400% increase. But then it gets really exciting. By 2045, according to current projections, we're going to reach 45 trillion machine-to-machine connections. Now, what does that actually mean? Well, I recently worked with a startup called GridCure, and it's using machine learning and big data to fight big congestion problems, specifically Shanghai. And what they're doing there is they're working alongside IBM's Watson. It's called Project Green Horizon. And the goal is to be able to predict up to 10 days in advance pollution levels on roads. Another example is drones. I recently worked with a startup called Rainforest Connection, which is using drones to track poachers and reduce the rate of elephants being killed. Over 50% of elephant population has been decimated over the last 10 years. Another great example, you wouldn't really position Dubai as at the forefront in terms of fighting climate change and urbanization, but actually, you'd be wrong, because the Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, don't ask me to repeat that, he is a visionary leader and a disruptor. In the last week, he's announced the first minister of AI. By 2030, the goal is to have 25% of the police workforce as robots. They've just introduced the Volocopter, which is an Uber in the air, pilotless, which you'll be able to order on your app. And they've started a blockchain council. One of their visions is to become the world's first blockchain city, saving up to $5.5 billion of savings a year in terms of administration and processing. That's the equivalent of one Burj Khalifa every year. So these are exponential technologies, and today I think they're an opportunity for you to think about them in terms of how you can use them, combine them, apply them to help reduce climate change, carbon dioxide emissions, and attack some of the big urban challenges that Helsinki and every other city on the planet faces. For example, housing. air pollution, transport, waste. This is a great example of an innovation I came across recently at Tokyo University. The governor of Tokyo, the first female governor of Tokyo, in collaboration with Tokyo University, has created a drone insect. Now, when you have your cereal, eat your fruit, drink your delicious coffee, I heard last night from Etu that Finland has the record for the most coffees, drinking the most coffees. And I had a debate with him. I was like, I'm Italian. Are you sure? This is a great example. Basically, over 75% of the food that we consume happens because of pollination. And again, another attack on our planet. Honeybees, their population is being reduced because of pesticides. And so this innovation is to really pollinate through the use of drone technology. It's clear to see that science fiction is becoming science fact. Now we have oil is the new data, information is the new currency, and I think AI will be the new electricity in terms of the level of innovations that we will see over the next 100 years. So let's take a pause, a strategic pause. How do you lead disruption? Well, I think there are three really important mindsets. And a mindset is a way of thinking. It's your assumptions, your experiences, your cognitive style, the way you see the world. And so the first mindset, which I want to give you, is the day one mindset. And the idea is that day one is a philosophy and a way of approaching your life and your business. What day one means is not business as usual. It means disrupting status quo thinking. It means asking why not. It means testing, innovating, inventing, and iterating. It means that every day is a new day because we can't take the status quo for granted. The second law of aerodynamics, thermodynamics, means that everything will atrophy. So status quo actually is not a strategic option because the law of thermodynamics has proven that it starts to atrophy, starts to stagnate, starts to decline, and it's a slow death. So are we day one or day two? A day two company or a day two leader is the opposite. It's business as usual. There's no urgency to change. Let's carry on the way we've always carried on. Let's continue to operate because things are okay and we don't need to worry about the future. A day two mindset lacks urgency. A day two mindset is comfortable with business as usual. Most great companies started as day one. And then through time, because of culture and size and scale and bureaucracy, they become day two. And the key is, if you're in a big company, how do you reinvent today to become day one again? I think organizations such as the Big Four, the Amazons, the Apples, the Googles, they're great at continuing to reinvent themselves. And even the Microsofts of this world. You know, with Satya Nadella as the leader, what he's done is try to go back to a day one culture. So day one or day two is a really important mindset. A great example of a day one thinker, no surprises, is Elon Musk. Over the last 18 months, I've interviewed, researched, and met some great entrepreneurs, including Elon, Yan Koum of WhatsApp, Stuart Butterfield of Slack, the workplace app. Elon, he's a 10x thinker, so he thinks big, 10 times bigger than the norm, and he uses a very specific technique, which you can use today. It's called first principles thinking. The theory is, because it's easier, most of the time we use analogy or imitation. It's just easier for the brain, this sort of mental shortcut in terms of making decisions. But it also holds us back, because when we look at what others are doing, it creates a view of the world which may not be accurate anymore. What it means that we may be holding on to past ways of thinking, which are now outdated and obsolete. And so first principles thinking, it's like a kind of physics way of looking at the world, and you ask fundamental questions and get to absolute truths about a problem. And so an example of this is Tesla. And the problem was that it cost $600 per kilowatt hour, which made the business model unviable. But what Elon did was use first principles thinking and said, okay, well, is that actually true? If we break down the constituents of a battery, nickel, cobalt, aluminium, carbon fibers, what are the constituent costs of a battery? And instead of $600 per kilowatt hour, it turned out at $80. Another example is SpaceX. And over the last 10 years, Elon has disrupted over 4 different industries: aerospace, automotive, solar energy, Hyperloop. He's started an AI organization called Neuralink. With SpaceX, another interesting case study. Again, he applied first principles thinking. The common assumption was it would cost around $65 million to launch a space rocket. That was the industry average. That's what the experts said. That's the minimum cost, $65 million. Elon applied first principles thinking, broke it down to fundamental truths, and ended up launching the space rocket at 90% less cost than what people thought was possible. The lesson, the learning, is that if you want to disrupt, you need to disrupt the way you think, first of all, and challenge assumptions about problems you face. This means asking questions, catalytic questions, that shift your thinking and create what-if possibilities. And so the key message, the number one message so far is day one. Ask yourself, am I day one? Is my culture, my organization day one? What am I going to do to fight for day one? Number two, use first principles thinking to avoid imitation or analogy or just compliance with the way that other people see the world. Because there are always alternatives if you have the courage, the sisu, to challenge that status quo. 10x is an interesting mindset, and it comes from California, so we have to manage this. But the theory behind 10x is that the truth is, most of the time, people, organizations, governments, city councils think too small. They think in incremental ways. They think 10% or 15% or 20%. And that's the way that we're educated, and that's the way that we grow up. The purpose of 10x is to say, well, if I ask you to build a car that goes on 100 kilometers for 1 gallon, you might be able to come up with a solution without 10x. But if I challenge you and ask you to create an engine that can do 1,000 kilometers with 1 gallon, that challenge is weirdly, counterintuitively going to make you completely rethink that problem. And by doing that, by going through that process, that cognitive process of disrupting status quo thinking, you then have the possibility to, from first principles, rebuild, reinvent, reimagine what's possible. And this is a cornerstone. It's at the heart, it's the core of disruptive thinking. Because in a world where uncertainty is here, volatility is here, complexity is here, ambiguity is here, you can afford to fail fast, fail cheap, move on, and use that as a learning mechanism. Here is a breakdown of how 10x thinking works. So, for example, later on today, you put the challenge, the problem at the center, and then you think about the solution and the technology, the exponential technologies I mentioned. And you can use this as a really clever methodology to think bigger, to think 10x, not 10%. Now, an important point. The purpose is not to achieve a 10x goal, because you probably won't, but that's okay. If you achieve 60% or even 40% of a 10x goal, you will still have disrupted business as usual. You will have maintained and been day one rather than day two. The goal here is to create an ecosystem. And for this ecosystem to work, there's 3 ingredients. So like baking a cake, you need great ideas, you need a great innovation process to make the ideas work, and you need investment. And historically, up to now, clean tech is just not sexy. VCs would rather invest in social apps, and that's why when we look at the 4 biggest companies in the world, with a combined market capitalization of over $2.3 trillion, none of them are doing anything in terms of initiatives to save the planet. So that says a lot. I'd like to see a world where we're putting planet first rather than profit first. So let's just do a recap. The first mindset is day one. Are you day one or day two? The second mindset is 10x thinking. This ability to think bigger and bolder with more courage. The third and final mindset is courage. Sisu. The reason I mention Sisu is that when I wrote my book, I interviewed Dr. Emilia Latte from Finland, and she's the queen of Sisu. And when I looked at entrepreneurs and leaders and organizations and policymakers who are thinking big and want to attack the biggest problems in the world, they all have their secret sauce, Sisu. Action-oriented, resilience, and focus. A great example of Sisu is Karen Dolva from Norway, one of your neighbors. Again, she fell in love with a problem. Her younger sister had a terrible car accident. She was only 7 years old and she nearly died. And because of this accident, she had to stay at home for more than 6 months. She was isolated and felt alone, and that has a direct impact on her ability to recover. Karen Dolva's solution to this problem was to create an avatar, a little robot. And the robot goes to school on behalf of the child. So you sit the little robot on the desk. The child can see the class, interact with the teachers and the students through their mobile, and feel part of a community and still feel part of life. Like most great ideas, it's now scaling up. And the company is called No Isolation. And actually, this is a big universal problem. With 7.5 billion people, aging demographics, there's a lot of lonely people out there. We all know. And we've all been probably lonely in our own lives as well. One of the side effects of technology is that it's also disrupting relationships and changing the way that we trust. So this business no isolation is a great idea of falling in love with a problem and then finding a great solution. And what we'll see over the next 18 months is a no isolation platform for many different types of people. Not just children, but elderly people as well that perhaps can't leave the home. So, to sum up, we're just going to hold there for a second. Can we go back one step? To sum up, there's 3 key mindsets which I've spoken about today. And time is limited, so I want to really give you a final call to action. And for this, I'm going to play a short clip and leave you with some final words from one of the original disruptors and chiefs, Steve Jobs. Your time is precious. Don't waste it. Don't get trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't allow the noise of other people's voices to drown out your own inner voice. Most importantly, have the courage to think bigger, to attack problems. Now is not the time for status quo thinking. It's time for action. Knowing that we're going to die is the single best way of avoiding the trap of thinking you have something to lose. There is no reason to get started. Thank you.